we're going to begin very shortly. It's on. Thanks. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon to talk about Iranian cyber activities and the various cyber threats to the United States and the West emanating from Iran and from other places. We have a two-part presentation. We will start off with a keynote from General Keith Alexander, whom I'll introduce in a moment, and then we will go immediately without a break into a discussion between myself. I'm Fred Kagan, Director of the Critical Threats Project at AEI. Sorry, I should have introduced myself first. And Tommy Steenson, the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Norse Corporation, and we'll discuss the report that we are releasing today and Project Pistachio Harvest, which will be an ongoing effort. But first, it is a real honor for us to be able to have General Alexander with us to talk about this issue. A lifetime of service to the nation, many, many awards, so many years as director of the National Security Agency that I have actually forgotten how many. Is that 8, 9, sir? Something like that? 8.5? I was close. And at such a critical time, at a moment when the agency was in the process of reacting to the new realities of the time, and cyber threats were growing, and all sorts of other challenges about which we don't need to talk now emerged, and General Alexander has just been an incredible steward of the nation's interests, committed to the nation's values, and relentless against those who would undermine American national security in any way. And so it's just really, really an honor to be able to introduce him and to hear his thoughts about the Iranian cyber program and whatever else he would like to say. General Alexander.
Thanks, Fred. You can see I'm a lot shorter. I have to bend this down here. First, it's great to be here, especially when you look at all the experts in this area. So it's like going to an advanced math school. That's right, Adele, I remember math. And you're not yet at the graduate level speaking to the postdoctoral students in that subject. Now, having said that, I had a wonderful time as a director of NSA. I was there 8 years, 8 months actually, and it was amazing. The best people in the world, some of the best technology, math and all that. They do great things to protect this country, to protect our people, and to protect our allies. It was a privilege and honor to work with them over all that time, and I would not have given that up for anything. Even Snowden, while that soured the last year there, gave me an opportunity to give back to the agency that which I got pretty much for free my first 8 years. So I just want to put that out first. I know that's not the purpose of my speech. Second, another wonderful part about being in the government, I had a chance to meet some of the most amazing individuals in our government. The Deputy Secretary of Defense, Paul Wolfowitz, and I began to talk back in 2001 on a whole series of things from counterterrorism to advanced analytic techniques and to all these things. And I can remember it was wonderful to be in with people who didn't look at your rank per se, but looked at what's your idea. And I can remember the Deputy Secretary running back into his closet to pull out some papers on a subject matter that I can't repeat or I'll be shot. And to talk about, here's why I think A. And he said, what do you think about that? And to have people ask what you think, this is the way our country, our government should work. Today, I have a very similar job. Fred and his team asked me about what I thought about the paper and the document that they're doing. I haven't read it yet. No, I'm just kidding. So I don't know. Beats me. And I'll give you the Shams outline version, then we're going to talk about this subject in general and come back to the specifics. First, I think it is vitally important that we do projects like this to help educate and inform all the people of the world, not just the American people, but all the people about the threats that exist in cyberspace. Because it's my opinion, this is going to get worse. So whether your job is doing ABC, this is going to be something that's going to impact our country, Europe, the world. So I want to step back and lead you through why I say that, and then what I think with respect to this report, some of the key things, and then we'll open it up for answers. I've had all the questions I can take. I'm looking for answers. No, I'm just kidding. We'll open up for questions. So first, one of the nice parts about going to NSA is a person with the technical background is, this is like getting let loose in the candy store. And all the things and people that you can talk to about technology. It's amazing. And what you learn, and what I learned being there for all that time, is how rapidly technology is changing. And I want to give you some insights to that. There's some great videos out. One's called Did You Know?, which is a 2014. They've just updated to a 2015 version. I'll give you my version of 2015. And that is, did you know that this year we'll create about 7 zettabytes of information, unique information? That's 7 with 21 zeros after it. That's more information than was created in the last 5,001 year combined. If you look at kids that are in college, I graduated a couple of years ago, and those that are in their freshman year, technology is doubling every 2 years. That means they're freshmen. By the time they get to be a junior, half of what they've learned will be outdated. And the top 10 in-demand jobs in 2013, 2014 didn't exist in 2003 and 4. That means we're training kids today that are in high school and college for jobs that don't exist, using technology that hasn't been created to solve problems they don't even know are problems. And it's all on this network. It's all on these things here. And it goes beyond that. There's things like the Watson machine that IBM created. And in creating that machine, they had Watson, a computer, beat the best 2 humans in Jeopardy. But it goes beyond that. That's of interest, that's kind of neat, throw that away. What they've done with it since, and other companies have, is taken that brain power and looked at how do we help in cancer. If you're diagnosed with a lethal form of brain cancer, you would have 12, 14 months to live, plus or minus 2 months. And the reason is it takes 5 doctors, back a year ago, it took 5 doctors about 30 days to come up with the correct chemotherapy and radiation treatment to treat you. And if you think about that, that's 30 days, and it's metastasizing faster than they can come up with a solution. Now, IBM, working with the Human Genome Center in New York City, got it down to 9 minutes. Think about that. A few $1 billion to map the human genome in the year 2000. Today, you can do it on an iPad or getting close to it, and we're going to be able to do that for a few thousand dollars. And with that, we'll understand the way cancers are growing. We'll all have great biometrics, and there's so many things that we can do that are good, and we can't stop. This is great. A lot of people say, well, look at all that Iran's doing, or Russia is doing, or China's doing on the network. Shouldn't we stop and step back? My answer is no. The technology is incredible. We ought to race forward. What we'll do in all these areas are incredible. But I think what this study illuminates is the great risks that are there. And when you step back and you look at the geopolitical part of what's going on today, and Fred told me, okay, I've taken some heat over some of my upfront thoughts about if we come up with a nuclear deal, they get more money, they'll have more money for cyber, we've got a problem. And I would tell you, it's kind of like one of those things you lose and you lose. Because if you apply sanctions to them, my opinion, they're going to respond with more cyber attacks too. your choice. You know, it's like your older brother, those of you who had him, he says, I'm going to punch you, which arm? You say, hold it, that's lose-lose, right? Well, that's what I see in cyber. We've got a couple problems coming our way. And we can argue over the merits of where this goes and how we respond to it. I think there's a whole series of things that we have to put on the table. So it's my concern, the P5+1, put that down as just a decision point, and two things coming out from that. You have terrorism and cyber coming out of Iran. None of those are part of the nuclear deal. And I am concerned about the nuclear deal. Where does that go? I don't have a solution for it. I'll just put that on one hand. I want to put Russia on the table because we've also done sanctions against Russia over Ukraine. And you've seen responses that have been attributed back to Russian hackers, Target, Home Depot, and others. And so what we're seeing and what we've seen is attacks against our nation and others because of sanctions using cyber and terrorism, but cyber growing. Those that wish us harm, it's very difficult to attack this country in physical space. We check the Canadians are okay. We checked that out. Eh? We're good. I had a guy go up, check the border. Looks pretty calm. Other than that, we're good. So if you think about it, how do they get us? Cyber. Now, there's two parts of this that when I look at it, and I think some of the things that the study has done and done well, it's illuminated the problem. And I'm just going to walk through my view of that problem. First, distributed denial of service attacks. These are attacks that they've used. The study talks about the 2011. I add in the 2012 as well. But these are attacks against the financial sector and others. And you can see these going on in the study, and the Norse folks will really illuminate that. These are ones that think of it as creating a lot of confusion. If you're driving your car and you have 6 kids in the back and they're all screaming and you're trying to talk to your spouse, that's a distributed denial of service attack. I have 4 daughters. I'm used to these. You can't talk through them. You have to wait them out. And it's the same for our companies. And when you think about it, they can knock down websites, knock over other things, and they do cause damage. And they are impacting, they are growing. And if you look at 2011, 2012, over 350 against the financial sector, huge. Now, what I'm really concerned about is when you marry up a distributed denial of service attack with a destructive attack. Saudi Aramco had that. And that's mentioned in the study, but I'd just like to talk about that for a second because that's what I'm concerned about. You saw in August of 2012 a destructive attack against Saudi Aramco that destroyed the data on over 30,000 computer systems. That's their BIOS and all their system wiped out. That means somebody had to manually come in and fix that machine and every machine that went with it. That data is gone. Hit RASGAS about a week later. In March of 2013, a variant wiper virus, probably from North Korea, hit South Korea, again in the May-June time period, and that same variant hit Sony last year and destroyed it. And you now know from what happened to Sony, and there's so many things that we can talk about on that, that these are growing. These are growing. So there is a lot of issues here with the threat and things that it illuminates about our defense, our strategy for defending industry, government, and an alliance. And we haven't gone far enough. We haven't solved this problem. You know, and here's my personal opinion, because I'm out of government, is that if everybody's getting hacked, if the Iranians can attack everybody, industry and government, the Russians can attack everybody, industry and government, the Chinese, and now North Korea, I'd say our defense isn't working. Just a thought. You know, if everybody's getting, you know, and there's this saying, right? Somebody stands up and says, there's 2 kinds of people, those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. So what that tells me is, you know, if everybody's losing, the strategy that we're working on is flawed. It's fundamentally flawed. We would never accept that here's the good deal. Everybody loses. You're going to go into Vegas. Well, that's true there. So, but, well, once in a while you might win. And so in this area, if everybody's losing, we've got to change that. So why are these studies so important? I think we have to talk about what's happening, and now what are we going to do about it? And there's the political side of this and what we can do, and then there's the technical side. I happen to be in favor of the technical side, but we got to do both, actually. We've got to set both of those up and have this discussion. And coming from where I did, I believe it's important to be transparent about what we'll do in cyberspace. Let's get ahead of it. Let's tell everybody, here's how we're going to protect the nation. Here's what industry will do. Here's what government will do. Here's what the information they'll share. And this is what it will accomplish. And we can and should do that. And what this does, what the study does, and I know Fred will go into it in a lot more detail, and they'll show you what this slide actually means. And it's that, oh, there goes a jet. Those are fast planes. Just kidding, it's not fast planes. What this will show you is the amount of things that are happening on the internet that you just don't see. In fact, if you were, we were talking about this, we have some folks that are really good in big data. And if you look at the big data across tens of thousands of systems and look at what's happening on the internet, you'll see things like this are increasing on that network. So we're at a point now where, okay, we ought to step back. As a nation, as a set of allies, we ought to look at how are we going to protect these networks. If today's strategy doesn't work, what's the future strategy? That's one of the things that we've worked on. We think we have some insights to it, but no one company, as great as we are, can solve it. It's going to require companies to work together, industry and governments to work together, and governments to work together. And so, Fred, I'd tell you from my perspective, I think what you've done on this, you had asked me that, I think the point of illuminating what's going on here, of drawing it out, and having the background based on evidence is great. So I think what you and the team at Norse have done is exceptional, and it's a start. It's a journey, and we ought to do more of it. So with that, what I'm going to do is open it up for questions. Since there are none, I'm out of here. No. Please.
Please wait for the microphone.
Was that too quick?
Emma Louise Leahy from Denton's. I was curious about the executive order that President Obama signed on April 1st, incidentally the day before the framework deal was announced with Iran in Lausanne, and how effective that might be in counteracting Iranian cyber threats.
Well, I think it has to have a fundamental technical solution to it. You know, think about this. I think the sharing and everything that's put in there is a good thing. It's a good step. I think we need to get the liability protection. We need Congress to act to reinforce what's put out there. And we have to have a technical solution that people can understand and go to. And from my perspective, when you start to think about this, if you don't have an ability to protect the network, we can have all the policies in place that you'd want. You might be able to get nation states out, but you're now seeing that criminal and other hackers, they say, that's not me, can have the same effect as a nation state. And what you're seeing is with this rapid growth in technology, if it's doubling every 2 years, from my perspective, what that means is people who think of their capability from 2 years ago could double just by the information they can get. You know, in that Did You Know video, one of the things it points out is people with access to Google today, that's everybody in this room, has more access to information than the President of the United States did 20 years ago. Think about that. And we're not the only ones with access to Google and that information. And it's all out there. So we're not the only smart people in this world. There are a lot of gifted people around the world. And so if you think about this, this is a huge problem for all of us. Thank you. Great question. There you go. Thanks. I like it without the tie effect. I told Fred I was going to lose my tie too. I think we're both hot, right? Michael and I.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Joe Gould from Defense News. I'm wondering what your take is on the military's approach. There's now been some talk of maybe even a separate service for cyber. Is there something You were saying that the approach has been fundamentally flawed. Is there something that the military could be doing that it's not doing?
Well, I'm sure there's something they could be doing that they're not doing, but I am tremendously proud of what they are doing. Step one is, I believe, and that's a great question, whose responsibility is to defend the country? So the Defense Department has a role and a responsibility to do it. Both Secretary Gates and then Secretary Panetta reinforced that in his intrepid speech, and so has the President and others. So the Defense Department to defend this nation from attacks. It doesn't say, except these kind of attacks. Because if somebody attacks in cyber, the distance between cyber and physical attacks can be very short. So let's go to the Sony. I just want to use that because many people say, should industry have the ability to attack back? And in my perspective, the answer to that is no. Because you don't want industry to either get the wrong bad guy, and so they see it jump through a server in Germany, and we attacked Germany by mistake. They say, oops, sorry, just got that wrong, but it was your server, so we wiped out this place. That's bad. The other part is if they go right to North Korea, they get it right, and they attack back to North Korea and they start a deeper war, that's wrong too, because that should be the administration's responsibility. So if you follow that logic, what it then says is, well then, government has a role and responsibility to do that. The government doesn't have the ability to see attacks on Sony. So we have to have an information sharing where industry can say, I'm being attacked, help, and do that at network speed. Not the government sitting on Sony's network, but a way of, just like we do with aircraft, we have aircraft, we don't send messages about aircraft via email, right? You don't say, I've got United flight 2170 is at these coordinates, and I send an email to the next guy down the road. He plugs it in and goes, let's see, they were there about 3 minutes ago. Oops, I went for coffee break 10 minutes ago. Where are they now? Ooh, I lost that one. It's automated. We could do a same thing with metadata in cyber, and should. And what we've got to do is come up with those sharing agreements. It should be transparent and public so that the public knows this is talking about metadata. It's not talking about personally identifiable information. But then if Sony's being attacked by a nation state or a criminal activity, the government can look at that and help. I believe that's where we're going to need to get to. If it had been a missile or anything else, it's the government's responsibility. So the partnership between the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, NSA, and Cyber Command, or the Defense Department in that role, is something that was laid out with Secretary Napolitano, Director Bob Mueller, and myself. And then the Secretary Gates and others all sat in and we got down that road. I think we need to go further. Now the second part that you asked about Cyber Command and other things, training forces. You need somebody ready to defend the country in cyberspace. And while we debate what's going on, it was my opinion and those of others that we ought to go train the people and be ready. Because at some point the nation is going to depend on the Defense Department to do that. And I was incredibly proud of all the services pushing forward and training their people, and they've done a great job of that. Finally, you talked about the issue of, do we make it a separate service? There were many who espoused a separate service. And what we did in 2007 is lay out a document that said, what's the right thing to evolve a cyber command? We looked at a subunified, a unified, a functional command, and a separate service. It was my opinion that we'd probably go to a unified functional similar to SOCOM. I was not in sync on taking it to a separate service for a couple of reasons. First, I thought that the forces needed to be embedded in tactical configurations. And if they need to do that, then the services should be involved and be ready. So the second part is this is a new area. There's no need to jump. Let's take a step to the unified, functional, and see how it is. You know, look good? Everybody happy? We're good with this? Do we need to take another step? It's not something that we need to jump to. In fact, I would say go to the unified, do the right things there. You have the trained force. It was probably more important that we get the policies and the rules of engagement down and everybody understand them, both here in the U.S. and our allies, than going to a separate service at this time. That was a long-winded answer. I have a shorter version. Other questions? Oh, I didn't get that. That sounded digital.
Hi, Abe Shulsky from Hudson Institute. One of the things that strikes one is
I went to school there. Oh, it's a different Hudson. We called it Hudson High. I'm sorry, different. You went to the Institute. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
This is Herman Kahn's old outfit from Dr. Strangelove days. When you look at the vulnerabilities that we face, a lot of it, I mean, it sort of comes from the fact that we're constantly innovating, we're constantly putting in new systems, and constantly making ourselves more and more dependent on these systems for our everyday activity, and that in turn creates the vulnerability. So the question is, should there be some sort of control on the speed at which some of these innovations get made so that we can make sure that the defensive part of it, in a sense, keeps up with the functional part? Because it strikes me that all of the incentives in the business world tend to be towards increasing the functionality of every single system, and that may lead us to open ourselves to vulnerabilities more than we ought. In other words, should we have some regulator on it so that we're looking at the vulnerabilities we're creating at the same time we're creating the functionalities?
My opinion is no. We should not do that. Here's why. I think the rate of change here is phenomenal, and it's absolutely great. I have 16 grandchildren. Yeah, I know, I don't look that old, thank you. And when I look, some of the ones that are 2, they use these devices. They'll take my iPad with their grubby little paws, and they'll be all over it. And the things that they're learning and the rate that they're growing is phenomenal. Cancer and other things. I don't think we should slow down. I share your concern about the vulnerabilities, and I would turn it this way. I'd say, look, in the past, this hasn't been a big issue. In the boardroom, CEOs, this hasn't been a big enough issue because the losses were acceptable. Well, we're at a point now where that's tipping. You can see the boardroom and the CEOs, the governments and others saying, whoa, we need to invest in this area. So I would take that approach. We need to invest. And actually, there are solutions that we could implement that would improve the security of our network significantly. That's behavioral models, it's big data analytics, it's situational awareness. It's integrating all those capabilities. All of that are things that we can and should do. That would solve 99+% of the problems that we have. Now, it's tough to get behavioral models going. We worked on that, so I think there are some great things. I would push to go faster. I really would. I think what we're going to learn here from science and everything else is, for everyone, something that I just feel that's very important for all. So I was asked that same question by several members of Congress, and that was a similar answer, although shorter, because they say you only have 30 seconds, General. Answer the question. Okay, other question, please.
Sharon Bovat, Voice of a Moderate. Do you have any comments about the airplane Wi-Fi system that was just talked about the new aircraft being very technical and they're worried about the Wi-Fi being used on airplanes? Somebody could hack while they're on the airplane. It was something that was recently reported. Do you have any comments about the airline industry and the hackings? Thank you.
You said you're with who again? Moderate?
Voice of a Moderate.
Voice of a Moderate? Well, who's got the other 2 voices? Or 3? I guess there's a whole set. Okay. It's probably a lot. That's a great question. I think there are vulnerabilities in all the platforms we do. And you saw some guy was arrested for something. And, I thought if you were tracking the news, occasionally I get to look at the news. I'll tell you this. The airline industry and others, the car industry and all these are working these problems significantly. There are issues out there that have to be addressed. And I think people see those and they're addressing those. Are there things that are concerned about? No, I fly. I actually use the Wi-Fi. You have to pay for it. I think what we should actually ask is, can we get the Wi-Fi free? And can we make it more reliable? Because it cuts out, as you're going across the United States. So I do think that they've addressed that, and I think they've separated the operational system from the Wi-Fi, and there are things that you can do to segment those networks and have no issues with it. Wow, a lot over here. I didn't raise my eyes that far.
Hi, my name is Chris Caruso. I'm an intern with the Middle East Media Research Institute. I'm also at the Maryland School of Public Policy, and the professor of the cyber class there is actually a former senior NSA official, and he thinks we shouldn't do a cyber bill just yet because he thinks that we'll get it done, and then, like you said, things change so fast that we'll just get locked into something that we can't get ourselves out of. How do you feel about that? Do you think we should get a comprehensive cyber bill, or do you feel the same way as that?
No, I think we should get one, and here's why. I think we have to be careful that you don't make it so technically specific that you're locked in. But here's what you can and should do. First, imagine if you would. That sounds like the Twilight Zone. Imagine if you would. The banking industry is getting scanned by Ukrainian hackers, real world, right? And they scanned several banks. And one bank had a vulnerability that wasn't patched and was exploited, JP Morgan. And in terms of sharing, if all the banks knew that they were being scanned and exploited or attempted like that, and we shared it across all of them, that radar theory, then everybody knows something from Ukraine is coming our way. It's bad, heads up. And if they knew that, they could just say, those IP addresses are scanning us. Heads up, government, you might want to go check this out and see why. Then you can determine from a government perspective of what you would do. So the ability to share information could and should is something that we could use to really help our defense. And it's a logical step. It's kind of like the prairie dogs. We want to communicate like prairie dogs. They have a better comm system. And they don't have Congress to work through, so they do it without legislation. Just a thought. But the second part of that, I never did think about that. Maybe we should make prairie dogs go back. Before you guys communicate, go to Congress. Liability. What happens if the government, who's sending something to industry on a vulnerability, finds out that they've screwed up? And now industry implements what the government told them to do, and it gets a lot of damage. Industry gets sued by somebody else, and it's the government's fault. They should have liability protection for that. So I think the bill has to thoughtfully look at those two issues, the ability for industry to work together, pretty easy, industry and government to work together, and then the appropriate liability between them. Please, right behind.
Hi, Will Carter from CSIS. A lot of people have said that the volume of cyber attacks we're seeing and the increasing complexity and destructive nature of these attacks demonstrate a failure of deterrence. And I just wanted to ask, what's your view on whether we have the technical tools to establish an effective deterrent? And if so, what changes in doctrine are needed to make it more effective?
So I'm going to split that into two parts, because actually it's yes and no. The deterrence would work good against nation states. It will not work good against non-nation state actors, right? It's very difficult to deter criminal and non-nation state actors. You've got to use law enforcement and raise your defense. Nation state, it's very difficult to deter those that you're applying sanctions on when they see this as a symmetric way of responding to what they feel is wrong coming at them. So you've got those two issues. I do think that there are things you could do on deterrence, but I don't think that's the issue. In fact, what you'll see is that this is rising. It's very easy for government to say, it's not me, it's not my guys, it's somebody else is doing it. These are hackers, and we don't know who it is, and we can't see them, and it's all bad. And then Johnny Depp, talk, right? So when you get that, it's what? They don't know. And so my perspective is the nation states, and you'll see this rising in the report, and I think Fred's going to show you how it's risen over, I think you're going to show that part. You'll actually see the rise from Iran. But now imagine all the world. It's more technically inclined. It kind of goes back to your question. It's growing so rapidly that all these things are coming in, that what it gets you to is, isn't there a better way for us to secure communications? And the answer is yes. Let's apply that technology and the resources to find those ways. That's my point. Way over there, blue.
Leandra Bernstein, Sputnik International News. I wanted to get your comments on the report today that WikiLeaks had released a huge cache of the Sony information that was hacked by the North Koreans. They're saying that because it shows the Sony's ties to government institutions, the White House, things like that, that it should be in the public domain, but this cache of information includes personal data, things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Two wrongs don't make a right. That was in case it was a congressional request for an answer, that was the quick response. I think stealing documents for somebody and then coming up with a reason to revealing them, or no matter how you get them, I think that's wrong, my personal opinion. And to say, well, it shows somebody doing something and so we're going to do this, I think that, I think looking at that and the way we're doing that, that's just wrong. My personal view. Now, I actually been running around so much this morning, I haven't seen that news report, nor have I read any of those, nor have I seen the interview, the movie. It's just been a little bit busy. Now, having said that, I really believe that those who steal stuff to then give it out to say that there's a broader good for doing that, I don't buy it. I flat don't buy that. So I'm probably on the conservative side of that answer because people don't know all the facts. They race into it, and you come up with the wrong answer and solution. So that would be my thought. Now, I haven't looked at all those documents. I haven't seen those, obviously. But generally speaking, that's how I'd come down on it. Others? Right in a row. Okay, bingo. Oh, was it, you get 3 in a row, bingo?
Steve Vito with Sage Communications. General Alexander, I'm just sort of curious what your reaction was, not from a political perspective, but from a national security perspective, when you learned that the Secretary of State had her own server, and do you think national security was at risk by her not using the State Department's servers?
Just a minute, I'm getting an incoming call here. Danger, Will Rogers. Do be very careful. Wow. No, and I'm not in politics. I'm an Army guy, so I haven't got a political bone in my body. Of reasons. I don't know the specifics of what she had, why she had it, and I didn't look at it. And, I think what we shouldn't do is look backwards to jump on somebody who's running. I think what we should do is look forward and say, so what's the right thing to do looking forward? And step one is first, we got to help State Department get their networks fixed. So those have problems, so go fix those. And then is there a policy that we'd put out from a government perspective on the right way to store government-like communications and to protect them? And if the answer is yes, then that's something that we would all abide by. And I think we need to push that out. I think actually the rules looking backward are too loose. And it's kind of, well, what's the best thing to do? People look at it, and I think that allows them to roll their own. I'm not sure that that's the best. I think, it kind of goes back to the general question. We could do better on defense, and we can come up with better policies and things like that. So that's where I'd look. I wouldn't, throw backwards. So I couldn't afford a server. I could build one, but they told me not to. No, I'm just kidding. Do not build those. Okay, I can take one more question. Please.
I have an opinion. It's also sort of.
So we're going to bring, and you can take this microphone home as a token of our. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, hi. My name is Dennis Morgan, and I'm a strap hanger. And maybe it's an opinion, but your comment about the fact is that all of us in this room, the government guys, military guys, the technocrats, do a really lousy job of conveying to the taxpayer, and that's everybody from an hour the other side of Warrenton, all the way to Los Angeles, an hour this side of Los Angeles. That's the taxpayer. And would you not agree, or would you not be of the opinion that we do a terrible job of telling Joe Dokes in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or Oklahoma, flyover country, why it is critical that we protect our assets? And I saw a study about 2 or 3 years ago where the biggest problem is people stealing trade secrets. Well, if I'm a chemical company and I have a dry cleaner solvent and it's going to create a lot of jobs, and all of a sudden that trade secret's stolen and I'm competing with myself in China, and would you not say that we talk up here over that flyover country, but we don't really put it down to a level that Joe Dokes that's driving a school bus understands that it does affect him?
I agree. So let me take that a little bit first. First, I'm amazed that there's another person here who listens to country music, the flyover states, which is good. That's a good thing. And we'll get that for the rest of you who don't have it, that song. We do a terrible job on many levels. I do think in this area, though, your point is very important. How do we explain to people the loss and the impact to our nation in these areas? And we do a lousy job. But you raise probably one of my most, where I feel the strongest is on intellectual property. The theft of intellectual property by other countries against us is the greatest transfer of wealth in history, period. Now, we store our intellectual property like in Central Park on the park bench. And then we come back the next morning and say, where'd it go? And somebody says they stole it. So the next night we put more out there. And the reality is we should fix our security and explain to people why we need to do that. I think both of those are right. And we do a lousy job. And so the American people don't understand how much of our future has gone. And it's incredible. It's incredible what's been taken. So, this is huge. This is our future. And so we should say, okay, stop. Let's fix our network defense. I don't mean stop technology going forward, but I mean stop, fix it. We could. It hasn't been important because it's not on the loss sheet. Well, it's getting there today. You can see most of the corporations, financial sector, energy sector, retail sector, and the defense departments, defense industrial base, they see this as a huge thing. So now while we've got that, we ought to drive it to closure. And I do think we need a better educational program in that area and for the flyover states. I just found out, though, that I'm paying taxes and I'm not quite that far out. So some of us on the not yet flyover state. So thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you, Fred. Thanks, folks, and hope you enjoy the rest of today. Thanks.
So we're going to move straight into the next phase of this. Tommy, if you want to come up. So good afternoon again. Very grateful to General Alexander for coming and taking questions as he did. It's always a treat to hear him. And I think it's very important to have a good sense of humor when approaching topics of this seriousness, because otherwise it's just incredibly depressing. I'm sitting before you as an extremely happy man because this report is done. And we have been working on this for 18 months, and it's been a good year now that we've been saying to each other, hey, don't you think we ought to finish this thing off and maybe get it out next month? And it just, it kept growing, and it's very complicated, and it's very important, and so we wanted to make sure that we got it right. But we recognize what General Alexander said, which is that this is constantly changing. And so we call this the initial report of Project Pistachio Harvest because we're going to continue to work on this. Both Norse and the Critical Threats Project at AEI are going to continue looking at the data and hopefully collaborating with you and with people in the audience and other Americans, because in a quite remarkable move, Norse has made the data underlying this study available at a website which is now live, www.pistachioharvest.com, where you can go and register and you can see the data that was used to generate this. I should also say that the report is available at www.criticalthreats.org and also at www.norsecorp.com. So we're going to keep working on this. But for now, this project is done. And so let me also take a minute to say, having told you that we've been working on this for 18 months, the question has arisen whether the timing of this release at this particularly delicate moment in Iranian relations was intended to affect anything. And the answer is absolutely not. I can't think of a time in the last several years that hasn't been a particularly delicate moment in Iranian relations, and I can't think of a time in the next 10 years that's not likely to be a particularly delicate moment. The timing of the report was actually driven by the RSA conference next week, where a lot of the country's cybersecurity experts are going to meet, and we wanted to make sure that we were able to share it with them and also get me a trip to California, which I'm very excited about. So 2 reasons I'm a happy guy. So we're going to begin by talking about the report. Tommy Stiansen, who is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder and really heart and brain and soul of Norse, will take us through some of the cyber findings.
So if this thing can work. I wanted to start with saying my end goal with the report was to avoid a divorce. It was a long 18 months. It was a lot of data. I think the total data amount was 120 gigs that we're making available. We're also making available all the underlying actual packet captures for all the events that we've captured. I'm going to go into some 3 specific points. I'm going to talk about the attacks we have observed and why we believe it's increasing and how it's increasing. Iran's use of Western cyber infrastructure, and then the inside attacks coming from Iran itself. And then Fred's going to help me with the non-cyber aspect. First, I'm going to talk some about how we have done all this on Norse end. So Norse has a global infrastructure spread over the world, 160 data centers. We are in over 50 countries. We emulate today about 6,000 applications. What we emulate is everything from nanny cameras to SCADA PLCs to complicated ATM financial systems. What we emulate is the code behind it. We also emulate the industry and the actual names that we come up with behind the industry. So it's a very complete emulation system. We have about 8 million emulators worldwide today. These collect a lot of data. Some of the data you can see on the map, that's actually coming into the sensors. The map signifies less than 1% of the attacks that is actually occurring. Some of the specialty that we have done is we have malware researchers and cyber researchers in Norse, and we find vulnerabilities 0 days, and we emulate these vulnerabilities. Sometimes we do the responsible disclosure and disclose them if they're terrible and they're in the wild. But we basically monitor people that are tracking these vulnerabilities. We have, that's what we call our global intelligence platform. We also have a team of fusion analysts, counterintelligence and cyber analysts, where we try to fuse all the data and make more sense of the adversarial network behind it. It's also very tied into our geospatial analysis, which tells you a lot about the data that you're seeing as well. You want to add something, Fred? The data. So if you look at the first graph, you'll see a steady increase of attacks coming out of Iran since we started the study in 2013. You'll also see the most astonishing graph, the last one, which shows how many more IPs were added to the attack vectors from Iran. So how many more IPs participated in attacks over the course of the study. It's, we have not been hiding ourselves that we're doing this study. We've gone to reporters, so we've actually got some phone calls into the Iranian embassy here and there. And that has helped with the attack vector and helped with our visibility too, but it's a new way of conducting research.
Right, but nobody knows that a sensor belongs to Norse.
Correct. Some key statistics. This is also available on the website, pistachioharvest.com. And this goes into some of the data that we actually been handling to do this study. We have mapped all the IP space in Iran. We have mapped all the Iranian-owned domains. We've cross-checked all the other domains owned by the same people around the world. So a very sophisticated way of finding it. We've then dug into the malware and the attack vectors originating from these domains and the networks behind them. And we're going to go into some of the examples on them as well.
So Tommy, the question has come up a lot. How do you know that you're not being spoofed? How do you know that you're not, it looks like it's coming out of Iran, but it's actually coming out of somewhere else, or it's coming out of Iran, but somebody's compromised an Iranian system and is just using it, so it's not really Iranian.
So data into our sensors, we do a very deep analysis on the targets that are actually attacking us. A lot of times you have indicators of compromise. A lot of times we disregard the data because the system that it's coming from appears to be compromised itself. We also, when we have all these signs and we do not see any signs of compromise on these systems, and the attack pattern is very sophisticated, and it's not emanating to any other places but certain targeted sensors in our system, we can determine with very strong determination that they are real attacks.
And what's kind of indicators of compromise do you look for? And are you able to see?
Anything from open ports, banners, systems, announcements in the dark world, selling of access to the system. We do a very comprehensive study on the system.
Right. So this has been a major focus of the effort. One of the reasons why this took so long, in fact, was to make sure that we were confident in the attributions that we were making, and we discarded a lot of data and a lot of examples because we could not be totally.
16 million attacks, and we ended up with less than 1 million in the end analysis. So the first example I'm going to bring up is how the Iranians are using our own infrastructure and our own innovation. I know we already talked about the innovation against us. We have a XL host, aka eNet Incorporated, which is hosted in Columbus, Ohio. And this is actually hosting Ashien. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Ashiana.
Ashiana. Digital hacking group, which is a proliferated IRGC-endorsed hacking group that is also operating as a government contractor in Iran.
Yeah, Ashiana, just to give a little background on that, the Ashiana group is an interesting group. Its head is a guy named Behruz Kamalian, who's been sanctioned by the European Union for participating in human rights violations in connection with posting pictures of protesters so that the Iranian regime could pick them up and crack down on them. And Ashiana itself has been identified by the EU as affiliated with the IRGC. And we talk about Ashiana in the report. It's an interesting organization. One thing you might want to know is that if you go to their website, you can apply for a certificate of ethical hacking, which is a program that they offer.
So the next hosted site on XL Host is Almanar TV, which in 2006 was designated as a terrorist entity, also supporting Hezbollah. These are actually hosted in Columbus, Ohio. And it's hard for me to understand, and it's hard for Fred to understand, I'm assuming, that why these are actually hosted in the US on our infrastructure. We also see that this XL host announces themselves in Iran as a hosting provider. They have a Persian page presence in Iran advertising their services. They accept Persian money transfers. Some are really suspect money transfers. They also host multiple websites. They also have interacted with our sensors immensely over the time of the study, which we're going to show a little more details on. First, we're going to show a little satellite picture of their hosting center. This is a residential house in Columbus, Ohio. And in 2012, this was a smaller compound. You can already see signs of a generator in the backyard. And immediately when our geospatial guy looks at this, he goes, wait a minute, someone has that big of a generator for their house? You'll see that they're starting a little excavating on the outside. during 2012, we also have pictures of their excavating process and how they're actually turning that whole compound into an underground facility of hosting. And looking at the power present, looking at the BTUs of HVAC systems, we can estimate about almost 400 server racks underneath that house. And it looks quite impressive.
And I mean, how large a facility is that?
It's about twice the size of Norse's facility that we do big data in San Mateo.
And how did you get the pictures, by the way?
From the owner's Facebook.
Very sophisticated collection techniques that we applied there.
They're public, by the way.
Exactly, that was my point.
So attacks coming from XLHost. This is what paints the big picture of XLHost. This is why we brought notice to them. If you're looking at the red column, you'll see XLHost. If you look at the green column, you have Peer 1 hosting. Peer 1 hosting is larger than XLHost. Look at the staggering amount of attacks coming out of XLHost at 60,000 versus 25,000 for Peer 1, which is a larger hosting provider in the US. And then we've also showed the Planet, which we should all know, Rackspace, large hosting providers. So looking at this paints a big picture about XLHost. If you look at the bigger pie chart showing the US infrastructure vector from XLHost, you'll see that 70% of the attacks are going towards US. And then you have Thailand, which is 2.64%. Thailand is a popular target because Thailand is used for a lot of CNC systems.
What does that mean, Tommy?
Command and control, meaning where your malware talks back to, where it gets commands from. We saw that in the Sony attack. Thailand infrastructure was used a lot in the Sony attack. More attack types. So if you look at the worldwide attacks from XLHost, you will see that there is 34% Windows attacks and 23% Unix mainframe attacks. What you're seeing is, remember, we've also separated the scan attacks and the scanning out of these attacks. So you'll see the scannings and the actual attacks are mostly brute force attacks, trying to break into RDP, remote desktop systems, which will give them access to the actual machine and operate the machine. What you see from this is a new picture where you see US attacks only, where you will see a different type of attacks. You there see critical infrastructure scanning is more prominent from XLHost. And you will also see that Windows and mainframe attacks are still there, but prominent is critical infrastructure scanning. This is interesting because you don't see this picture from any other hosting provider.
So what conclusions should we draw from all of this?
XLHost is designed to attack us.
So there's a lot of, obviously, we've had a lot of commentary on the report already, even before people were reading the report. We've had commentary on it. But one of the commentaries is dismissing this, scanning activities and saying, scanning activities go on all the time. We're reporting them as if they're news.
There's a difference in between scan, and we differentiate between scanning and attacking. We've, behind the RDP tools that we're seeing here, we actually have the tool set that's used. It's an actual program software that we have uncovered that is used in the attacks. And it's a very fancy brute forcer that is written by an Iranian. Attack vectors from inside Iran. So I invite you all to go take a look at all the analysts' stations behind afterwards and do some deep dives. I'm going to touch these points really quick, and then Fred will help with the politics behind it. Provincial RGC website, we've recorded about 31 attacks coming from 5 different IPs. We have the Iranian student Basij organization. We've seen two interactions. We've seen 2 major attacks in May and 1 in August. We have attributed this to the actual tool. We have been able to locate the tool based on the packet captures and the information from the tool, because there's a very specific pattern to this attack. And it is actually trying to break into very known Windows systems to control them.
So this was a very interesting find for us. When we saw this kind of activity, I was frankly surprised, because the network infrastructure that this is coming off in Iran actually belongs to the IRGC. And this is something we took a hard look at this, because the websites themselves are generally, they look like they belong to the Basij organization. And the Basij organization is an auxiliary group. It's a complicated thing. It is part of the IRGC. It was incorporated into the IRGC in about 2007. These were the guys who provided the human waves that were used in the Iran-Iraq war. Those were mostly Basijis under the control of the IRGC. So when we initially I saw these things coming off the Basij websites, I thought that was interesting. But then as our analytical team here that follows Iran, especially Marie Donovan, who's been working very hard on this, looked at these sites and we talked about it a little bit, we realized that they actually aren't Basiji sites, even though they're basij.ir. They're actually the websites for the provincial IRGC units in each one of these provinces. So we have attacks coming off of infrastructure that is actually running IRGC-controlled websites, as well as these large attacks that are coming from the central organization of the Basij student organization, which is an arm of the IRGC. So what's going on here? First of all, I want to contextualize a little bit the question of attribution, because we've had a lot of comments about this, and it's a very important question. It's very important not to be attributing things falsely to people, and we're very alive to that. But one of the things that you have to be aware of when you're looking at malware coming off of Iranian systems is that the Iranian internet is one of the most thoroughly monitored, censored, and controlled internets that you'll find anywhere in the world. And this is very well documented, and it actually didn't result from Stuxnet. It resulted from the protests after the 2009 presidential election, which rocked the regime to its foundations and convinced the regime that the internet and social media posed a dire threat. And so they immediately reacted by doing a number of things, including at the moment of the protest, just shutting down the internet completely. But then bringing in very sophisticated monitoring tools and changing the way traffic was routed so that they could better control it and monitor it. And one of the patterns that was identified by observers at the time was that different Iranian networks came back up, achieved full bandwidth faster than others. And there were clearly some networks that the regime trusted more than others. And so we took a look at those, and we did find malign traffic coming at Norse sensors from those networks. So the point is that the internet is not a flat surface where every network is all the same and it's equally hard to do attribution. When you're looking at things that are coming off of a highly controlled, highly sensitive, monitored system where you know that the regime is paranoid about everything that's going on its system, or particularly coming off a network that the regime's behavior has identified as a network that it trusts particularly, then your threshold for attribution needs to change a little bit. And that's one of the factors. It wasn't decisive, but it was one of the factors that allowed us to have confidence looking at these things. So when I first saw this, my first reaction was, well, aren't they foolish for doing this from their own infrastructure? And the answer, of course, is yes, they are. But the pattern of the attacks and the way that they spaced them in time and the way that they came at different Norse sensors suggests to me that they were in fact trying to be very, very stealthy, and they would have been very, very stealthy if they had not been hitting sensors that belong to a global network that could bring the data back and show us the pattern. So in other words, it actually was a very sophisticated attack, and they should in principle have been able to get away with it in all likelihood. But we were able to identify the pattern because they were hitting many, many different sensors in the Norse network and created a pattern that we could see that revealed that this is coming from the IRGC. So the question is, I think, why? What do we think the Iranians are doing? And what are they getting ready to do? Well, the short answer is we don't know exactly what they're getting ready to do, of course. But the first chart, or one of the first charts that Tommy showed that showed the rise in attack data as opposed to the rise in the number of IPs that the attacks were coming from, is very alarming. They are building more attack infrastructure than they are using. It would be normal dealing with hackers to use infrastructure as you build it out. That's how people normally work. But that's not what they're doing. The size of the attack infrastructure that Norse is seeing has increased about 500% in this period, and the attack ratio, I think, has only increased by about 100%. So you have a very significant increase in attack infrastructure and a much more limited increase in attacks, suggests to us that they're stockpiling attack capability. They are preparing capability that they might want to be able to use later. And here's where our efforts at looking at Iranian strategy overall, which are led by Matt McGinnis, who's our Iran analyst here at AEI, looking at Iranian proxies throughout the region and how they use those, part of the critical threats effort, and partnered with the Institute for the Study of War and the Iraq and Syria teams there. What's remarkable is how similar this is to the way the Iranians tend to build out human networks and their proxies. They tend to infect as many places as they can, as many groups as they can. They tend to try to get the capability to get people to do things down the road, and they don't use them until they need them. They lay in a lot more infrastructure than they think they need at any given moment, and they mostly lie low with it until they have a need for it or an opportunity to use it. That's their standard modus operandi in other areas, and it's interesting that we are seeing that kind of behavior here as well. So what would the Iranians get out of having this kind of infrastructure? I think that what they get is the ability to have escalatory responses in a non-military way to increasing sanctions, tensions, military operations, things they don't like in the region, and also to have what they would hope would be some kind of plausible deniability in those operations so that they could find ways of inflicting pain on us without getting a conflict to the point where we attack them, where we invade them, where the Israelis invade them, and so forth. So it looks like an attempt to develop a series of escalation steps for crisis more than anything else. Now, once you have the capability to do large-scale attacks, you could decide that you're going to do that for another reason and so forth, and it's a problem for them to have that capability. But I think that this is most likely what they're actually trying to develop. How serious is the capability? I'll turn that back to Tommy. I mean, in terms of sophistication, there's a tendency to see Iran as favoring defacements of web pages and denial of service attacks. It seems to me that we're seeing a different kind of threat here now.
We've seen increasing threats. I mean, we still see the defacements, but we see it more as training exercises. We start to see a lot more rootkits. We start to see a lot more.
What's a rootkit?
A rootkit is when you take over the server and the operator, and no one else knows that you're actually controlling it. It's very stealthy. Then you have the counterintelligence operations of hacking is the core of hacking, when you can start stealing intellectual property, which is what we're starting to see Iran starting to do. It's starting to steal intellectual property, which is the holy grail for especially a country that's sanctioned. What we have seen is the sophistication grow from the defacements to the more complicated rootkit systems. We've done some smaller studies for customers of Norse where we've seen large-scale campaign for email infiltration. Very stealthy, very critical, and sophisticated on the lines with other great nations.
So it's a concern. This is something that we need to take very seriously. As we say in the report, we don't regard the Iranian threat as being unmanageable. We're not suggesting that that Iran is 10 feet tall in cyber and we need to be panicking. But we are saying that what we see is a significant growth in Iranian cyber capabilities, both in size, in overall scale, and in sophistication, and that this is something we need to take very, very seriously. And also, I would say, and this surprises some people, that it seems very strategic. The Iranians are moving intelligibly down a path in cyber that makes a lot of sense given their ideology and where the regime thinks it's doing. And so it's not surprising that they're doing these kinds of things, and we probably should be able to predict to some extent what they will do next. And we need to start thinking about how we're going to factor those realities into our discussions about Iran policy, but also our larger discussions about cybersecurity policy. And I think, unless you want to add anything, Tommy, we should start taking some questions.
Sure.
All right, so please wait till I call on you, the microphone comes, and then make your statement in the form of a question. Oh, and identify yourself. Yes, it's coming.
Thank you. I'm Bernie Thomas. I'm with Business Integra. And regarding the excess capability that Iran seems to be stockpiling, I just wanted to ask, is it possible that instead of stockpiling, they're buying these assets to train on and have schools and people training on that and then using not all of that for the hacking that you're seeing?
Oh yeah, definitely. We see both of the efforts. So we do see the training exercises on the systems as well. But we do see more stockpiling than training. We've attributed a huge growth to the hacking groups. I invite you to look at the analyst files where you can actually see every single member of the hacking groups, and you can see the growth over time. There's been an exponential growth since September 2014 in the amount of hackers.
One of the things we're going on here is, first of all, we're seeing a lot of live fire training. So these are training and these are attacks, that they're attacks on our infrastructure or on what they think is on our infrastructure that is in the process of this training. So this is not just schoolhouse kind of training. And I would also say, it seems to me, Tommy, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you've compromised a system and can use it for training attacks, you can use it for real attacks also. The system is compromised, you have access to it. And we're seeing an increase in the number of systems like that they have.
Yes.
So is it stockpiling, is it training? I'm not sure. It's an increase in the overall attack infrastructure that they actually have at their disposal, and that's rising faster than the number of attacks. So we can draw various conclusions about that, but I think that that fact is of concern. Other questions? Over here.
Hi, I'm Sharon. I'm voice of a moderate. One more question. I get a lot of hackings, and I have been told they're international. But I have a lot of web stats from Columbus, Ohio. I've reported my computer hackings to the FBI. I've had the DOJ person in charge of internet, cyber, the new cyber program, tell me that it's hard to prosecute when it's an international case. But you're telling me that the server for Iran, if it was, who knows who hacked me, but if it was Iran, it's in Columbus. Does that put any liability on anyone in the state of Ohio, or should I start reporting hackings to the Columbus FBI? Thank you.
So that depends on the attribution of the actual attack that you're experiencing. Forensics and the incident response will help you reveal where the attack is coming from. The attacks that we attribute it to is because we've dissected the attacks and we track them back to the actual locations. So if you're experiencing attack, this is where I wish General Alexander were here and he can answer you who to contact.
Hi, my name's Tom Smolars. I'm with the Washington Center. We talked a little about earlier on deterrence of these cyber attacks. With the mounting amount coming from Iran, and as General Alexander mentioned earlier, the sanctions and the economy isn't going to stop Iran. What kind of deterrence or what kind of sanctions do we have to imply to stop somebody from having a cyber action against the United States?
I think General Alexander's answer is that we need to have technical solutions to mitigate these problems is probably right. I don't think that there's an easy way to deter non-state or sub-state actors. They're just not generally deterrable. As for deterring a state actor, well, you can ask how successful we've been deterring the Iranians from doing a variety of things that we've tried to deter them from, like sponsoring terrorism around the region and using their militaries around the region, doing various other things that we disapprove of, and we're actually, I would say we have not cracked the code on deterring this regime in general from doing much of anything, and I doubt that we're going to be more successful with them deterring them from using cyber, which is even harder to attribute. But I think that it's something that, and I'm not here at all to talk about whether anyone should take offensive action, cyber action, or any of that. These are things that people need to look into. But I think that General Alexander is generally right on two important counts. One is we need to share the information and we need to know what's going on. People need to understand who's attacking them and why, so that we have any chance of developing an intelligent response to it. And the other is that we really do need to start focusing on technical solutions to help mitigate these things and at least defend ourselves properly when we can. Tommy, do you have thoughts about this?
No, pretty good.
Okay. Next question.
Hi, Chris from Memory again. How would you rank the threat that comes from the Iranians as compared to other cyber adversaries like Russia, for example, or just any others?
I would rank it par with other capabilities. One thing that we're seeing is tool sharing. Iranian has jumped to tool sharing boat. Their adversaries are sharing tool. The mercenaries working for Russia is working for Iran.
I think one of the things that we've generally noticed is that the purpose of the Iranian attack seems to be a bit different from the purpose of Chinese attacks and Russian attacks, in that the Iranians, especially the high-profile attacks, have tended to be destructive attacks rather than theft. And it's noteworthy that they broke into Sands and they didn't, as far as we know, try to steal a lot of money. They broke into banking and they didn't try to steal a lot of money. That's not what they were after. They were after doing a lot of damage. They broke into Saudi Aramco and they did a lot of damage. That's different from the modus operandi of the Chinese in terms of their priorities, and also from a lot of Russian hacktivists who tend to be pretty mercenary and trying to turn a quick ruble, or dollar actually. They prefer dollars. And so it's something else that's a little bit more worrisome. I'm not prepared in terms of statistics to be able to quantify that balance, but as we look at what the Iranians are engaged in, it does seem to be more security-minded in a national security sense than criminally minded in a strictly mercenary sense. Would you agree with that, Tom?
Sure. For the record, it's bitcoins today, by the way.
Right, bitcoins. I wouldn't know anything about that. I still use money.
Does what you said, Fred, also speak to who is hacking within the country? As far as you can tell, I imagine it's impossible technically to know. Is it someone who's a male in their 20s or in their 30s who's not married without much alternative hope? But if we look at sort of the demography of who is drawn into this, is it dislocated people in university? Can you tell us anything about that?
So I'm not aware that we can trace any specific attack back to any particular individual in Iran, and I wouldn't want to try to do this on this podium anyway, even if we could. But we actually do know a lot about people who identify the Iranians who identify themselves as hackers, and we know a lot about the Iranians who are being trained deliberately by the regime to be hackers, and those are two different. Generally different categories. So because the Ashina digital security team pretends to be a legitimate business, and also because it pretends that its hacking activities are legitimate on behalf of the state, these guys post information about themselves. And some of them have Facebook pages, and some of them have various, on their forum, they have various pieces of information. They range in age. They're from young kids to teenagers basically to people in their mid-30s and getting on actually. And so there was some reporting about this actually pointing out that the founders seem to be settling down a little bit and raising families, and you let the younger hackers go out and spend their days looking for sites to hit. But there's a generational handover that's going on that's consistent within that organization. These are not downtrodden. You don't look. Iran is a difficult country to live in. It's still relatively heavily rural, although it's been urbanizing. The rural communities are very, very widely dispersed. Their communications are not good. Some of them have internet, some of them don't. Most of the stuff that you're seeing is coming out of urban areas, and most of it is coming out, it looks like, from well-educated, urban Iranians. I don't want to say elites. I don't know whether they're elites or not. But we also know that the IRGC has a cyber command, has a program to train members of the Basij, who are all walks of life, all so forth, in becoming hackers for the regime. And we also see hacking coming out of university systems, and some of the university professors being sanctioned for malign cyber activity on behalf of the regime. So you have, a cross-section that you can see visibly here tends to be well-educated with obviously reliable access to the internet, and that already automatically defines certain categories for you within a country like Iran, any country really, but especially Iran. And the people who identify themselves in this way as being, cosmopolitan, people who pay attention. They're very responsive to, hashtags on Twitter. So one of the spikes that we saw corresponded to the Israeli operation in Gaza. And the calls on Twitter with Twitter hashtags for Operation Save Gaza, which were called to obliterate Israeli computer stuff, and Iranian hackers were right there. So they're alive to these things, and as Tommy said, we see them interacting on hacker forums with other hackers in a sophisticated way. These are well-educated people, and these are very, very smart people, and they're very talented people. And I think there's sometimes a tendency really to underestimate Iran and think of Iran as a third-tier country, and it's very poor and all like that. That may be, but they've invested a lot in their academic infrastructure for a long time and their IT infrastructure. So it's a very serious issue.
I'm seeing a sense of pride in their hackers too, something I haven't discovered before. I mean, we've changed on hackers from a lot of nations. A lot of the other ones have in common that we don't find them on LinkedIn. But then we go look at Iranian hackers and we find the LinkedIn profiles, and they even put each of their hacks in as resumes.
And their aliases.
And their aliases.
Yeah, I mean, you could go to some of these things, and it's, Iranian hacker, but whatever the name will be, and it'll be alias, Iranian hacker. These are the defacements I've done on LinkedIn. It's like, okay.
And what university they got their education from, and it has made the job of tracking them easy because they announce themselves, their pride in their hacks.
And they post their defacements. If you go to zoneh.org, which is a site where a lot of these things are announced, Ashina takes credit for 65,000 defacements, and they list them, and you can look at the screenshots and so forth. They're not. Some of their hackers are very proud of it and very loud about it. Some of them, I think, are more professional and much more stealthy.
Some of the actual attack codes that we've gotten a hold of's got the person that wrote his LinkedIn in the actual code.
And to all you Iranian hackers listening to this, by the way, please continue to do that. It makes our jobs a lot easier. Any other questions? Please.
Hi, Raul Aguilar. I'm with the Washington Center too. I'm curious about a bit about the methodology of the study, in the sense that did this come about as a result of a wider study and then focused on Iran, or was it from the get-go going to be focused on Iran? And if it was, why specifically Iranian hackers and not, I don't know, Chinese or Russian or North Korean or like Canadian hackers, or I don't know?
So thank you for teeing up what I probably should have explained at the beginning, which is how we decided to do this. And basically, about 18 months ago, Kim and I and some of our colleagues from the Critical Threats Project Institute for the Study of War were introduced to the Norse team and saw their capability. We have had for some years a project at the Critical Threats Project studying Iran, looking at Iranian security issues and the regime, and we realized that that Norse had a lot of data to be able to help us look at what is actually, a fairly hard target to study, Iran. And so we both decided, and Tommy can tell you what his interest in Iran stemmed from, but we both decided that since we had a team that was already had linguistic capabilities, had Farsi, and so forth, was able to look at this and knew something about the Iranian regime, and wanted to know more, Norse had good data. It seemed like a very natural test case, because the other topic that we study at Critical Threats Project is Al-Qaeda. And when we started this 18 months ago, the Al-Qaeda cyber presence was not significant enough to merit a study like this. So that's, from my perspective, that's how we got into this. Do you want to talk about?
So, same way, we were actually working on a Chinese study at Norse. Then Fred came and asked for Iranian data, and we started looking at it, and we got very interested in what we were seeing, and we started drawing interest, because we then saw sophistication and a lot easier to track than the Chinese activity.
Which, to be fair, other people were also tracking heavily and reporting on. And so, I think we both decided that rather than pile onto that topic, we could look at another, potentially more interesting issue. All right, well, we have, before you go, I want to tell you that in addition to the party favors that we have for you in the form of our beautiful reports, we also have a number of analysts here who are available on the left side of the room as I'm looking at it, who are happy to show you some of our data, talk to you about the specifics of our methodology. Again, Norse has made 120 gigabytes of its data available for the nothing but the cost of giving your email or somebody else's email. Actually, Tommy's onto that. At pistachioharvest.com, and this is an effort that's going to continue, and would love to have people look at the data, tell us where you find interesting things, and in general help us move forward with looking at this very complicated problem. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me to get to work with Tommy and his fantastic team at Norse, and I also want to thank Heather Malcaria here, our program manager at the Critical Threats Project, who has carried this burden on her shoulders for the full 18 months just about, and done a magnificent job. Tommy, do you have any last thoughts?
No, it's good. I want to thank the Norse analyst team and the Norse people that's helped. They've done a tremendous job. We've pulled some really, really long hours. We're still married.
So we achieved the report's objective. There was no divorce. And with that, thank you very much for coming to our event today.